It is 2 a.m. in New York, 7 in London, and 4 on a Tuesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Geun-hye. This is ARIRANG Korea's only global network. President Park Geun-hye is set to rack up some serious air miles as she embarks on a 9-day trip to India and Switzerland on Wednesday. ARIRANG News Presidential Office correspondent Eoh Jin-joo tells us what she aims to accomplish during her state visits to the two countries.
President Park will focus on promoting her vision for a creative economy and securing greater foreign investment in Korea during her trip to India and Switzerland. In India, President Park will hold bilateral talks with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and discuss ways to further develop the two countries' cooperation in various fields, ranging from economic affairs to science and information communications technology. India is the world's second-largest market with a population of 1.2 billion and is currently moving ahead with a 5-year economic development plan that runs through 2017. The Presidential Office of Chungwa says there is great potential in many areas for cooperation between Korea and India will be a key partner in helping Korea realize a creative economy, one of the Park administration's major goals.
India is globally competitive in high-tech industries such as IT and aerospace. Korea will sign MOUs with India in the fields of science, information and communications technology and aerospace during the President's visit to strengthen cooperation, especially in sectors related to the creative economy.
The President will also seek ways to upgrade the Korea-India Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which took effect in 2010, and urge the Indian government to support Korean companies, including POSCO, which has been working on a project in the Indian state of Odisha for 8 years now. President Park will be the first Korean leader to make a state visit to Switzerland. There she will hold a bilateral summit with President of the Swiss Confederation, Didier Burkhalter, and visit economic sites to benchmark Switzerland's vocational training system and its economic system, which is centered around small and mid-sized firms, all of which could be linked to her vision for a creative economy. The President will wrap up her trip at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where she will meet with the CEOs of global companies such as Cisco and Siemens and urge foreign businesses to invest in Korea. Eoh Jin-joo, ARIRANG News.
Ahead of her overseas trip this week, President Park Geun-hye reiterated that any North Korean provocation will be met with a very firm response. In an interview with CNN Monday, President Park said further provocations have been predicted by experts at home and abroad, and that she puts the utmost priority on national security and safeguarding the South Korean people. Now, saying North Korea has become even more unpredictable after the purge of leader Kim Jong-un's uncle, she stressed on the need to prepare for every eventuality. Now, with regards to Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to a controversial war shrine, the president said she hopes to form a future-oriented relations with Tokyo based on right understanding of history. Shifting our focus to domestic politics, the chairman of Korea's ruling Saenuri Party has thrown his full support behind President Park Geun-hye's ambitious 3-year economic innovation plan. Now, he also vowed to improve the efficiency of parliamentary politics in his New Year's press conference Tuesday. ARIRANG News parliamentary correspondent Kim Yeon-ji reports.
Ruling party chief Hwang Woo-yeol called for a rigorous reform of public sector corporations in his New Year's press conference Tuesday, saying many of them are poorly managed and weighed down with debt.
My party will set up a committee for economic reform, which will have 2 subcommittees, each tasked with reforming public corporations and regulations.
He also pledged to boost domestic demand and foster the service sector. Regarding healthcare policy, Hwang said the party wants to enable hospitals to form for-profit subsidiaries. He denied that doing so would privatize the health sector.
The healthcare policy my party and the government are pushing for would keep the public healthcare system centered around the National Health Insurance Service, while allowing hospitals to set up for-profit subsidiaries, such as hotels, restaurants, and funeral halls. This will allow hospitals to increase their profits and improve management. Again, this is not a privatization of medical services, nor does it have anything to do with a spike in medical fees.
In line with President Park's emphasis on reunification, Hwang said his party will start laying the groundwork for reunification, including the passage of a North Korea human rights bill. The existing North Korea human rights bill, first introduced by the Saenuri Party in 2005, stipulates that the South Korean government make rigorous efforts to protect the human rights of the North Korean people, currently a population of roughly 24 million. But the bill has been stuck in Parliament for years due to bipartisan differences over the content. The Democratic Party chief said on Monday that his party will soon draft a bill aimed at improving the human rights and livelihoods of North Koreans. The ruling party chief stressed that his party's #1 priority is to reduce social conflict and achieve national unity, saying that those things are key for achieving reunification and bringing the country a per capita income of $40,000. He also pledged to normalize parliamentary politics and strengthen relations with the opposition party. Kim Hyun-ji, ARIRANG News.
School textbooks in the United States may soon identify the body of water between Korea and Japan by 2 names instead of 1. Now, on Monday, an Education and Health Subcommittee of the Virginia State Senate unanimously passed one of the 3 pending bills to designate the sea both as the East Sea and the current Sea of Japan in public school textbooks used in the state in the future. Now, the other 2 pending bills contain similar stipulations and are also likely to be approved with strong bipartisan support. If passed by the full Senate, the bill will take effect on July 1st. And this developing story, police say they are going to arrest the leaders of Korail's labor union accused of having organized last month a rail strike. Now, following a confrontation at the headquarters of Korean Confederation of Trade Unions that lasted for several hours on this Tuesday, police announced that they would arrest a dozen union members as part of their investigation into the strike. The unionists have taken refuge in the building for over a month. The confrontation followed comments by Korail union leaders Kim Myung-hwan, who said in a press conference earlier in the day that key union leaders had volunteered to turn themselves in to the police and take responsibility for all that the strike has caused. Of course, last month's 22-day strike was the longest rail strike in Korean history, with union members protesting against what they said was a government plan to privatize the rail industry. Now, shifting our focus, the government will make all-out efforts to streamline red tapes and ease regulations this year as it seeks to attract foreign investment and stoke domestic demand, particularly in the service sector. Yoo Ri-an reports.
Trade Minister Yoon Sang-jik on Tuesday promised radical regulatory changes this year, aimed at making it easier for companies at home and abroad to invest in the country. In his first meeting this year with senior policymakers and business leaders, Yoon also vowed steps to help businessmen cope with a weakening yen that hurts competitiveness of local products in export markets. The government will rewrite regulations to remove all barriers blocking investment, except for a new minimum list of restriction. The move is part of a campaign by President Park Geun-hye's administration to reinvigorate the export-driven economy by stimulating domestic demand, particularly in the areas of software, education, tourism, health, and financial services. Park has placed high priority on streamlining red tapes in the high value-added service sector so private investment can flow into promising areas of the economy. Deregulation has until now been mostly undertaken in the manufacturing and environment sectors. Yoo Ri-an, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, Korea's auto exports surged to a record high of almost $50 billion last year as local automakers expanded their presence in the luxury sedan market. Exports to the U.S. also hit a record high in 2013. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korean auto exports reached a record high of $48.7 billion last year, despite production losses of billions of dollars following strikes by Korean auto workers. That is up more than 3% from a year earlier. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy says that the nation's auto exports got a boost from sales of luxury sedans in advanced economies like the United States and the European Union. Exports to the U.S. in particular are estimated to exceed a record record $12 billion in 2013, according to the Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association. The U.S. sales of luxury sedans produced by Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, including the Hyundai Genesis, jumped over 20% last year from 2012. The ministry said sales were also helped by a moderate economic recovery in the U.S., which pushed up auto demand, and Korea's free trade agreement with the EU, which raised the price competitiveness of Korean automobiles. Meanwhile, Hyundai Motor, the nation's largest automaker, is aiming to boost its market share in the U.S. to 4.7% this year from 4.6% in 2013, with its new Genesis and Sonata models driving gains. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Now continuing on with part 2 now of our 5-part series on Korea's industrial competitiveness. Now this time we're going to take a look at the country's strong global reputation for building high-quality industrial plants. Korea's expertise in the field has been reflected in a steady rise of overseas orders in recent years. Our Kim Young-gil reports.
Korean industrial plants have built up a track record of building plants ahead of schedule without creating safety problems. That helped Korean construction companies enter a phase of steady growth since their overseas plant orders topped $60 billion in 2010. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy forecasts the amount of overseas orders in 2014 to top $70 billion.
Hyundai Construction and Engineering expects to win mega projects this year by diversifying its bidding areas. We expect that more than 70% of orders will come from overseas this year.
Although orders from the Middle Eastern countries have been on the decline in recent years, market analysts expect new orders to emerge in the region this year on signs of the global economic recovery. Construction companies also plan to set their sights wider. Korean construction companies are planning to target the Middle East and Asia this year. They want to build a large-scale oil refinery and petrochemical plants like this one, as you can see behind me. The Korea Plant Industries Association expects the global oil refinery market to grow by 4% this year and the next. However, experts warn that although Korean construction companies have become globally competitive in oil refinery and petrochemical plant construction through massive projects in the Middle East since 1973, Korean construction companies are competing among themselves in cutthroat fashion.
We are facing competition, not just among ourselves, but also from Chinese, Japanese, and European construction companies. We need to diversify our markets and focus more on technology-integrated projects, like nuclear power plants, renewable energy plants, and civil infrastructure.
This year, the government plans to help finance Korean construction companies in the initial stages of the bidding process for overseas business projects and help companies expand their markets into Africa and Southeast Asia. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
We turn to business today. First, to look at the local bourse. Seoul shares reversed earlier gains to finish lower on this Tuesday, tracking global markets as foreigners offloaded local stocks, but the yen's sharp rise limited further losses. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi was down 0.15% to end the day at 1946, while the tech-heavy Kosdaq also shed 0.1%. Now, on the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency closed weaker against the greenback at a bit higher than 1,059 won. Fresh data shows Samsung and Hyundai Motor, Korea's two biggest conglomerates in terms of market capitalization and sales, accounted for nearly a third of the combined operating income of local firms in 2012. Now, this, of course, is the latest sign of that wealth is concentrated among a handful of conglomerates in Asia's fourth largest economy. So the implications and what can be done to alleviate this wealth concentration, we have Dr. Kim Myung-joo, head of KLMP Consulting, and our regular commentator here on Business Today. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So we have new numbers about a familiar story that the Korean economy is much too dependent on two big namers, Samsung and Hyundai Motor Group. Now, these two account for as much as 36% of Korea's GDP. That's a very big chunk.
Right, indeed. And when we say very big, 36%, it's easy to say, but it's as much as a 1/3 of GDP actually being produced by these two companies. I have some technical issues about what this number exactly means, because the entity that compiled these numbers, they use the corporation's revenue as the size that will account for the portion of the GDP here. So there's a question whether actually corporate revenue itself can be compared on equal terms with national GDP, but still numbers are quite shocking. Let's bring it up on the screen here. And basically, as you mentioned, 35 to 36% of national GDP is what they are accounting for. And as we can see, Samsung's size is about like twice as big as Hyundai Motor in terms of this output here. And the growth, the rate of growth from 2008 to until 2012 that you see, the numbers of here is pretty fast, actually increasing from 23% over to 35% as a whole. What this actually means is there are several implications. Number one is the industry. Do we want to have Korean economy dependent upon the semiconductors and automobiles here? We have had bad enough experience back in 1997 when the economy was heavily dependent upon these two sectors plus shipbuilding and steelmaking. And when the global markets of these industries went down together, we suffered from the financial economic crisis big time. And we don't want to have that being repeated once again. That's industry risk. Corporate risk, I mean, we still have a fresh memory of what happened to Nokia, BlueBerry, and Toyota a few years ago when Toyota got into big trouble. And, we are talking about not just the industries here, but it's just Samsung Electronics, basically, and then Hyundai Motors. And if those corporations get into trouble for the reasons that comes from outside or originates from inside, there are all these variables and possibilities of risk. And then do we want to have this national economy depend upon these corporations that much? That's very risky thoughts that we can have. And talking about Nokia, we have clear memory of what happened back in 2006 when Nokia kind of headed down. Overall, the national economy of Finland, not only growth, but also the jobs and also the even tax revenue for the government suffered big time. So those are the sense of risk that we are having here.
Well, the two groups' combined share of national corporate profit has grown even faster than the GDP case.
Right. GDP we saw growing from 25 to 35. But let's bring up the numbers here in terms of corporate profits here. This is almost doubling within the same period from 11% to 22% here. And once again, Samsung accounting for about twice as much of the Hyundai Motor here, and this is like 1/5 of overall corporate profits. This actually can have a big distortion effect in terms of knowing how well Korean corporations are doing. Indeed, if you exclude these two corporations, there could be a very different kind of picture that emerge. We talked about this before, and depending on which companies we are talking about, top 30, top 10, or top 5, if you exclude these companies, you can easily come up with negative numbers for some of the rest of the corporations. So this is a very serious question we're talking about.
No, just recently we saw Samsung missing its earnings targets and whatnot because of a saturated, mobile phone market.
Right.
Now, and it drove the entire Kospi down.
Yep.
And then we realize how much the two groups' really dominance can increase financial volatility in this economy.
Right, indeed. The financial market is the place where we can feel the most immediate and perhaps most amplified effect here because of these numbers. Let's bring those numbers up on the screen. We are talking about almost like over 1/3 of the market capitalization being represented by these two companies. And what happens is because this is asset market, this is a financial market where psychology matters a lot. So it may not really matter what actually happens to these companies, but if there is an perception and belief among the investors here in Korea as well as abroad, if there are some kind of misunderstanding about what's happening to these companies, there will be immediate reaction to these financial markets, and we'll see tumbling down of these stocks, pulling down altogether Kospi numbers. And what happens is, when that happens to the financial market, it affects directly the real sector of the economy as well. And even without those kind of troubles, when we have this kind of a high concentration of capitalization, what happens is just takes away the opportunity for other companies. It takes capital away from those companies as a whole. So there is this kind of, drying up effect, if you will, taking the available capital away from those companies that need to grow, and there is that distortion effect as well that we are looking at.
Now, would you say the government's hands are tied as well because the two groups pay such large corporate taxes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. We had Yoo Rian's report earlier today talking about the industry minister kind of asking these companies to invest more proactively here. That's probably as a result of this corporate power that we are talking about. Let's bring up the figures for the corporate tax on the screen here. Basically, Samsung Group and the Hyundai Motor Group together, they're paying for about 1/5 of all corporate tax in this country. So what does this mean? This means actually bigger leverage over government policies indeed. If these companies move their productions overseas, outside of Korea, it will mean the reduction in terms of tax revenue for the government itself. So government actually loses its leverage itself in this kind of very imbalanced situation. So what these two companies do in terms of their investment planning and their hiring planning and so on, government will actually be influenced and swayed by these decisions. So indeed, this is growing vulnerability on the side of government, and as all, because of this imbalance, the effectiveness of government policy itself will have to be reduced.
Well, making note of the Samsung and Hyundai Group's dominance in the Korean economy, yesterday Finance Minister Hyun Woo-seok said the government needs to, or it needs to be monitored. The economic, I suppose, concentration needs to be strongly monitored. Now, what can be done then?
Well, actually, what he was talking about, in my own interpretation, was the data distortion effect or illusion that we can have because of this huge relative size of these two corporations in the market. I mean, as we talked about the corporate profit data, for instance, if we exclude those companies, we just come up with a completely different kind of picture. If we exclude those companies' production, we can come up with completely different size of the national GDP here. So indeed, the government is realizing now the pressing need to come up with this kind of alternative data to check the overall condition of the economy, excluding this corporation. So indeed, what the Deputy Prime Minister of Economy has said was a smart thing, and there is urgent need to have this kind of adjusted economic data without the Samsung and Hyundai included in the data structure itself. And in the future, in terms of policy, the planning and so on, there is obviously there is no immediate answer, readily available answer to this. But the government policymakers will be mindful of the gravitation effect, for instance, pulling the capital away from the market and pulling human resources and human talents away from other corporations. That needs to be kept in mind, and that refers to the resource distortion, the resource distribution distortion and all that. So in the future, perhaps the Korean government will be more mindful of these kind of factors in planning their economic policies ahead.
Right, and I suppose, the Samsung and Hyundai Group can be attributed for the growth of the Korean economy as to the size that it is right now, but now it's time for distribution in the market.
Perhaps.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay.
With rapid changes in the global economy, up-to-date business and financial news has never been more essential. See what's making markets tick around the globe. We speak to the experts and cover the biggest financial stories.
North Korea provocation.
Quite good. We received a lot of positive feedback, especially from those abroad.
Well, it is one freezing day here in Seoul with dry condition advisories issued in parts of this country, but here now is a look at the weather conditions in your neck of the woods. And that brings us to the end of this newscast, but stay tuned to ARIRANG. We have a lot more coming your way on Early Edition at 6.